What would happen if I took a chance? It's always hard at first glance. I don't wanna, but I know I gotta do it. The truth is hard to swallow. I think I'll chew it.
A few years ago, I started writing a fictitious story based on my time as an educator. It is called Taught, and the story was partially inspired out of anger and frustration fueled by burnout. Okay, actually, it was more than partially inspired by anger and frustration. But Taught has also become a vehicle for me to tell what I thought at the time, and in some ways continue to think, was and is the real story of teaching. I now realize that my perspective is not everyone's perspective, but there are some pieces of Taught that resonated with many educators. This podcast is an extension of that story, and I, a former teacher, will interview other educators asking them to share how they really feel about the current state of education. Why are so many teachers burn out? Why are so many, like me, leaving the field? We likely won't solve any problems or come up with any solutions, but we can create a community of voices that maybe begin the conversation around how educators can take back teaching. I'm Melissa LaFour. Welcome to Taught, the podcast.
I like to be educated, but I'm so frustrated.
So you are still working in education, though. So you're not in the classroom.
Yeah.
You decided to leave that and do something different. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, when I moved to Portugal, I knew that I wanted to do something in education, but I was pretty much set on not working in the classroom. And as teachers, we do gain a lot of skills that we don't often recognize. So I've actually written some of them down because it's almost like a shout out to teachers too, because we kind of think we've been institutionalized in this school and all we know how to do is X, but actually we've got organization skills, management, data analysis, report writing, tracking and monitoring, assessment, ICT skills, presentation and communication skills, dealing with difficult situations on the spot. We know that teenagers and young people are a tough audience. And how many situations have you got to judge right then and there? And I think that we need to recognize that first of all.
I appreciate
so so I think thinking okay, well, I'm going to go out and teach is it's just too much of a limiting uh word. I think it doesn't encompass all the things that we actually do. So I thought about all the things I had to offer and all the things that I did as a teacher, because you're not just a teacher, are you? You have a lot of pastoral roles. And one of mine was working with the A-level students, the sixth form students, which is 16 to 18. And a lot of that is about moving them on to the next stage in education, further education and university. So after a while of thinking and working with students remotely, helping them get into selective schools, could be university or selective secondary schools, test prep, those kind of things. I expanded what I did and I founded In the Loop Education. And really, the idea is that students go through many different transitions in their education, and their parents go through transitions. I focus on international students because I guess I've always worked with international students, new arrivals to the UK, and here as well, students coming from the US or the UK, and they're going into different systems. They're going into the British system, they're going into the Portuguese system. And I know that as a parent myself, there's a lot of confusion around what's what. We
Oh,
don't
yeah.
even know the right questions to ask to get the right answers. And I feel like the parents that are in the loop that make, that have the right information can make the best choices for their kids and help their kids make the best choices for them. So, in short, what I do is I work with international families, helping them develop educational plans for their students, for their children. So, education pathways, let's say. We know that not all kids are going to go to college, and that's absolutely fine. not all kids are academic or want to go that route. And it's really about recognizing that early, not trying to force them down a path that is just ultimately going to lead to frustration and failure because it's not right. And offer them a wide range of options, show them the options, right? So that they can make the best informed decisions for their families. And, it's been very rewarding work. What can I say?
And for our listeners, I will be linking in today's show notes all the ways that you can contact Isabel if this sounds like something that you might be interested in looking into. As a parent myself, my daughter is not at this place, but I have two adult daughters, and even in a system that I went through myself that I felt like I knew, I found it challenging for me to
Mhm,
navigate. I think that the world of education and higher education is kind of like the rest of our world. It's really evolving quite quickly,
mhm,
and you do have to kind of stay on top of things. Um, I know that recently you were telling me a story about a student that you were working with actually here in Portugal, and the student is not seeking out an international opportunity. He was seeking out something, um, we'll call it local, but here in Portugal. He wanted
mhm.
to stay in the country. And even you told me that even his process was a little bit different than what you are used to seeing the process. So it's just this next
Mhm.
piece. Can you speak a little bit about that? Because I do love the fact that he had to do this little thing.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because all schools are very different. So we can't even just speak of the Portuguese system. We have each individual school, it's got their own sort of entry requirements or hoops that they want you to jump through, especially as schools are becoming more and more competitive. In this particular case, this student had to do a an elevator pitch, which is new to me. There have been some hints that well, there have been other schools who've asked for videos. Um, so this is also becoming popular, but an elevator pitch was quite interesting because it's very specific. It's a specific format to deliver it in. And, we kind of think of this generation as so easy and comfortable in front of a camera, but actually, when it comes to doing something like that, that's not the case. In this case, this particular student had a very good camera presence and seemed very comfortable. So that wasn't the issue. But I think, you know, one of the things I tell people is that you don't know what you don't know. And I think that that is a real, it's going to be a real feature with international families because you're moving. And like you said, even when you're in your own system, things move on. The options we had when we went to university were completely different. Now
Is it?
you could do internships, you could do stages. I think that's the word, internship. So I'm trying to translate it. I don't know why, because the Portuguese word shouldn't come to my head first. But anyways, and as things move on, who's taking all this information and putting it in front of you and saying, these are your options? It doesn't happen like that. And so I think a lot of parents are finding the need to have somebody give them an overview of what their options are and where they could go. Not
I
sure I
think
even
so
answered that
too.
question. What's the question?
Well, yeah, no, that you did. I kind of got us off track just because you were talking. I wanted you to talk about the elevator pitch, just
Oh
because
yeah.
when you talked about it, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to
Yeah, it's
really
but
prepare.
that's it. You've got to stand out. And that's what a lot of things are. And sorry, and this is the other thing is, you know, we find this in any area, but students aren't always aware of what the competitive environment is. Say you go to a school and you are the smartest in your class. Well, you have maybe an inflated impression of how you fare amongst a wider range of kids, but it could be completely wrong. And so, perhaps the way you sell yourself is not as strong because you have no idea what other kids are doing. And I find that to be even more true in an environment like here in Portugal, where students are coming from many different systems and backgrounds, and they're in a new one that their parents don't understand. And it's maybe only too late when they realize, oh my gosh, I don't have that experience, or I never did any of this, or I didn't get that grade, because they're not aware of what the expectations are going to be in a few years' time. By the time they find out, the kind of scrambling.
Yeah.
So I think when you're in your system and you're in a school, your teachers kind of signpost these things to you, don't they? They tell you, next year you're going to be doing this. In April we're going to be practicing that, and you've got things clearly signposted. But in this environment, that signposting is missing,
Yeah.
and there is no push. There is that teacher not saying, "Come on, let me have a look at that personal statement for you." There's no one doing that, and so there is a sort of need for someone to come in and be that person.
I think it also helps that you are an educator, and so you understand from that perspective. And I think that this is something that many parents and families need help with as they go along these pathways. Even if their student decides, not to continue on and go to college or anything along those lines, a
Hmm.
lot of times parents don't fully grasp exactly what their children need to be doing at each level to be successful as they get to the end of whatever their career, or I'm sorry, their education pathway may be. So I think having guidance is super helpful when we know our kids are on this trek and we're not
Absolutely.
100% sure how we can support. I know that you have done some really nice work, working with the family as a whole, it being kind of this holistic approach. Hmm. Where you have enabled parents to get some education themselves on what they
Right.
can do to be supportive.
Right. It's
Yeah,
important. Parents have to be in the loop.
they do, which is why I love that name. Um,
Thank you.
very, very good marketing on your part there, keeping everybody in the loop. So you transitioned to pretty much a new career in your move to Portugal, and you're using the same skill set pretty much that you were using in the classroom, except it's on your terms now.
Absolutely.
What advice would you give other educators? Because this is something that comes up. It comes up in all the teacher blogs, it comes up everywhere you're looking. And you kind of hit on this already, but I'm teaching. I don't know what to do if I'm not a teacher. And actually, I'm going to ask you to talk about two things. The first one being what advice you would give, but maybe even before that, it's a little challenging to come into the Portuguese system and become a teacher. Not because I mean, they have high expectations for their teachers, but teachers do not get paid well and they work a
Mm,
lot of hours here. So
absolutely.
I can Perhaps you could give a little insight on what teaching is like in Portugal, so that our listeners kind of understand why you didn't attempt to go that route. And then give a little advice on what advice would you give to teachers who want to continue to work in education, but not necessarily in a classroom setting?
Okay. Well, I don't have any direct experience working in schools in Portugal, but I make it my business to speak to teachers, um, just from a point of interest, and just because, well, they're educating my kids, I want to know what this is like. And I've spoken to teachers about it, and there are some, beside low pay, long hours, lack of appreciation, which we're finding a lot in Western countries. I would argue that the conditions are very different in Eastern countries, where I have many students too, and teachers are highly regarded. But that's just a generalization on my part. But you know, there's also a system in Portugal where every few years the teachers can just be moved. I remember, I think they call it concurso, and one of my children's teachers, she was from Coimbra, which, well, for well, I'll give the listeners an idea. To this area, she was probably about 2 hours from her home. And how it works is after 4 years, they decide whether they're going to change your school. And it could be completely out of your district or area. So I know for a fact this teacher was not in the home that she owned, and she was having to rent an apartment with her daughter. Her daughter, of course, was then displaced from her school because her mother has to move. And so they move as a family, and she's put in another school. And the husband was a teacher, and he was somewhere else in
Yeah.
another part of the country. And, I found this almost hard to believe, almost to the point that well, not almost to the point that I had to ask other teachers about it. And it was true. And, some teachers do stay within the district, but you know, they have to move to another school, which, you think, okay, fair enough. Let's keep schools, let's keep teachers moving a bit. But you also think, hmm, is it right to make them have to go? I just feel like it disturbs your life. It disturbs, you have a family, you have children, and you're potentially having to work 2 hours from where your home is and move and take on an additional expense of renting. And I completely feel for teachers. I don't get the impression that CPD um, would you use that in the States? CPD, continued professional development?
Yeah, professional development's probably
Professional development.
continuing
CPD
education.
is widely on offer either, like a sort of, keep our teachers abreast of what the news, what's new in education, or how they can, manage this or that. I don't get that sense either. But again, I'm not an insider in the Portuguese education system, so it's really hard for me to say. But these are just some conversations I've had from
Well,
teachers themselves.
I think when as an expat, an immigrant coming into the country, when the biggest concern for most of us in putting our children in the public system is how often the teachers go on strike,
Mm,
that's pretty telling
mm,
about how challenging that work environment is because
absolutely.
uh, any I feel like none of us go on strike unless it's a last resort. And that's in the United States. I'm going to assume it's the same in Great Britain. Um,
Not very
I think it's
common.
it's the same here. Nobody wants that. We all go into it
Mm,
because we want it, like you said at the beginning. We want to be in a classroom building relationships so we can get to know some kids, figure out where their learning's at and how far we can take them. We are not into the whole politics. Actually, teachers, I feel, are thrown into politics. We don't want to be there,
mm,
yet
yeah.
and there quite often.
I agree. And just to also, because I guess if I had considered teaching in Portugal, it would have been at one of the international schools, which by and large are located in Lisbon and a few in Porto. And I've heard stories too. It seems like this pressure to perform and to for students to get these grades, not really for the students, but just for the school to be able to then sell it to more students. Well, these are our results, is causing an enormous amount of stress on teachers. And I've had parents tell me that um, their kids have told them about the teachers, the stress they're under. It's made some teachers, a bit impatient under pressure. I had another parent tell me about teachers crying about the pressure that they're being put under. And, you think, oh, I'm working at this nice international school in Portugal where, the kids are paying, double digits and thousands to go to, and the teachers are under enormous pressure. So it makes you realize that, maybe this is not some isolated American, British, focus on just pushing teachers to the bone, but it's actually um, more widespread than we think. This is international schools where you think, well, people tend to think at least it's going to be this much nicer ride. Things are going to be a little bit easier. The environment's going to be better, but actually, maybe even worse because of that pressure for kids to perform, but make the teachers make the kids perform. The relationship is not direct. It's like push the kids. The teachers have to push the kids to make them perform. And of course, every good educator encourages their student. But like I said, there's so many factors outside of what happens in the classroom that affect student performance that really are not taken into consideration enough.
That's a really good point. And you're kind of making the case for why you would not want to leave one system that was not working for you as an educator and jump into another one that sounds like it had a lot of the same pitfalls.
Hmm.
So you did branch out on your own, and you did a lovely job of pointing out just a few of the skills that teachers have, but we don't see that in ourselves. What
No,
we
you're
see
right.
is, "Oh my goodness, I've got to get a job." I hear teachers say this all the time, educators, "The only thing I've ever done la, 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 worked in a school. The only thing I ever did was teach 1st grade. The only thing I've ever done
Yeah.
is work at the middle school and as an English language arts teacher." So you branched out. What's your advice for others that still wanna we still wanna help, we still wanna teach?
Mm. Yeah, I would say take stock of your skills. And you might not be able to do that on your own because I don't know how you feel, but when you've worked in a school for a while, it's almost like you go into a cave in the morning and then you come out, like the outside world and everything that was happening when you were in the cave, you're almost unaware of because you're just so hyper focused on your job. You don't really have time to think about all the things you do. You just do, and you're in go, go, go mode. I know I felt like that. You're in go, go, go mode from the minute you walk in the building until you step out. So I think it's really hard for us to see what we do. Everyone around us is kind of doing the same job. And it's just a given that you're working under tight deadlines and doing all these things that you see in job descriptions for all sorts of jobs. So I would say take stock of your skills. And if it's hard for you to do, which it probably will be, is to talk to somebody who is not a teacher or who's left teaching and have them look at those skills and tell you exactly, well, okay, monitoring and assessing, or even data analysis, always analyzing data, creating data. Show them that's an example of how you do that every term. And find someone that can help you realize what skills you actually have. And I guess nothing is successful without some drive and passion behind it, right? What would you want to do in an ideal world? And I know we all have these crazy dreams as well, but within within reason of what you would do professionally. I think for me it didn't come straight away. Like I said, I always just try and follow what I'm interested in, and that evolves into what I want to do eventually. I've always kind of trusted that method, even when there's some anxiety attached to it because you feel like you're just doing. But I feel that that's a tried and true process for me. Is try something, try creating resources. If that's what you loved about teaching, then try that. Put some out there, get feedback, see where it's going, and then maybe you think, "Ooh, I found this really interesting niche. There's this group of kids or people that are being ignored, and I really feel like I've got the skills to address their needs in some way." And um, and I think that through that process, you can really find what makes you tick, find your interest, do something that motivates you.
I think you're right, and I think going and looking up your own job description, you're going to
Mm,
get a list
absolutely.
of the skills that they needed you to have to do that job, and we do forget. We forget that, you know, if we were to read our job description, we might not even recognize ourselves.
I agree with that 100%. That's really, really well put. Yes, I agree. I agree.
So, if you could go back and work in the world of formal education again, if you weren't an entrepreneur, you went
Mhm.
back. Or maybe you don't go back, you just change it for everybody else. Because my question's gonna be, what is one thing you would change about education right now?
Oh yeah, I'm ready for this question. I think for me, it would be about revolutionizing education, the content, the way we teach. A million teachers have said it. The education system is not fit for purpose. I've read a statistic saying that sort of something like 85% of the jobs that are going to exist in 10 years don't exist now. And I don't think that the system we have now is preparing students for that uncertainty, they have to be flexible, adaptable. And the two skills, and this is coming from, not from Isabelle Delatour, but this is coming from the major think tanks and the major researchers, saying that the top skills that are going to be in demand are analytical thinking and creative thinking. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't see much analytical or creative thinking skills being promoted in schools. As a matter of fact, I see the opposite. It's less about thinking. It's more about remembering and learning how to apply certain knowledge. Just apply it in a sense that not apply it in a real context, but apply it
Yeah.
on paper, right? So not even manipulating objects. Oh, how would that filtration system work? No, it's about how would you describe it in that essay question. And so education is very far removed from, in my opinion, developing those skills. So I think the education system has to move more towards um, letting students problem solve in creative ways, talking problems out, working out solutions, manipulating objects, building things, making things. It needs to be far more interdisciplinary as well. I think learning, in learning, I would say when I look at students and I speak to students, I can see that they've compartmentalized subjects. So, the overlaps between, any subjects aren't really seen in their head. The English belongs there. I will write well on my English essay, but I will go in history and forget all the writing rules because good writing belongs in English and history, I just need to do this. Or, they're not making the links. And that's really dangerous because our world is interdisciplinary. We don't live in a subject.
Right.
And so I would say top things would be promote the types of skills that are going to be most in demand: analytical thinking, creative thinking, get students manipulating objects, and cut out a lot of the stuff that kids just aren't going to need in school. They just don't need to learn, or they don't need to learn in a school environment. I think that would solve so many problems, Melissa, because students, you know, they resist the things that they don't think they're going to need and they question it constantly. And as teachers, sometimes we even have to make things sound important just so the kids will do it. Miss, why am I going to need to know this? And you're like, well, you're going to need that to pass your test. And that's just not a good enough answer, is it?
No,
It needs to be relevant. And I don't think that a lot of students buy in
yeah,
to that. They're reluctant learners because they don't see the connection. And I think that's, the job of, I think it's the job of teachers, but we don't really have the say, do we? That's the people at the top making decisions and not really consulting with the people that are on the ground. And that's the real shame.
absolutely. And I think that it's a bit of a societal failure as well,
Hmm.
because I still believe that our education systems have become a childcare service from
Hmm.
age 5 to age 18 for a lot of people, not everyone.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
and it's like, well, while you're there too, you can get what you need to be successful later on. But this is a combined approach. I don't think that any education system can be successful without the buy-in of all the stakeholders. And our families are stakeholders too, because they're sending their
Hmm.
most precious resource. We're trying to help, but that bridge has at some point broken. When the grid
Absolutely.
is not strong.
Mm.
It is for some families, but we have more and more each year that they're very disconnected from what their kids are learning. So,
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
So I have another question for you. As you know, I
Mhm.
ask the same questions every podcast, and this one's a little tougher. You did, spend some time in the classroom. And one of the things that I am finding via the podcast and via the interviews that I do is that most of us have had some some firsthand trauma or at least secondary trauma as a result of being in the education system. So, what is a traumatic moment that you're comfortable sharing that you have experienced directly due to being an educator?
Yeah, well, it's a mix of two things. One was an actual event, and the other is just about a first year of anxiety, really. Just the kind of anxiety that makes you shake. I worked at a school where there were a lot of confrontational kids. And that year, the school had made a decision that was very unpopular with the year 11s. So they're talking about 16-year-olds. And they were upset. And, they were going to let everybody know about it. I was new teacher, new to the school. So me and my colleagues were on the receiving end of a lot of this anger. And, you get yourself in a lot of situations where you are challenged by the kids in a very public way. So you ask a student to do something and it becomes a confrontation. They might get out of their chair, they might come close to you and argue. And, you have to be this adult with the right answer all the time, which is a really stressful part of teaching when you are, especially when you're new, but in general, just as a human being, you just came here to teach. And I found myself in that situation quite a lot that first year. And there were 2 days a week where I had this particular class that I just dreaded. There were, like a couple kids in there that just were impossible. And so I think going through a full year of this anxiety on the way to school and, just feeling this real tense, just your body just being very tense until that last, of course it would be the last class of the day, so you've got it all day long with you, was very, very um unsettling. And it wasn't a great way to start your career, because set that kind of set the bar for normalcy, if
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
um and later that year, there was also a student that was stabbed and murdered, and that was sort of that same cohort, and that was very hard because, I mean, like with anything, you watch the news and you see knife crime, which is a big problem in London schools, in London in general, and a lot of young boys lose their life to knife crime. And it's like with anything, when it happens so close to you, to somebody to somebody you've taught, it's unbelievable. It's just like you just find it so hard to believe. I didn't have a particular connection with the student, but it was cordial. He was in my class. I knew who he was, and that was enough. He was a 16-year-old boy. So that was very that was a very that was very hard, and it was very eye-opening, just to the kind of environment, like how quickly a kid could just one year be like this, 14-year-old starting to pick their GCSEs, and then, you know gang
And
culture and all these kind of things sweeps them up very quickly, and they lose their life.
I
So
really
yeah.
appreciate everything that you just said because I think without the even without the untimely death of a student, I think that many of our educators in we call it high school in the United States and even in our middle school. So we're talking, grades 7 through
Hmm.
12.
Hmm. Hmm.
This constant existence in confrontational environments where you are expected to act in a way that is not going to escalate the student, and that's
Absolutely.
different for every student. I cannot think of more stress than that.
Yep.
We have these young people who, to be fair, are still in a place in their lives where they're learning to regulate their own emotions, and that just really leads to some scary situations, I would say, for most educators who are teaching in those schools. And not one person yet has really brought this up. Um,
Mm,
but I was right there when you were talking about, you have these students that are confrontational, and you really described it with a lot of grace and love. And I appreciate that as well.
thank you. Thank you. Yes.
So, same cohort of kids, though, they can be funny.
And there were so many lovely ones.
What's a
So many lovely ones.
memorable moment that you have as an educator?
Ooh, you know, it's really hard to pinpoint one. But this story maybe is a little bit funny. Um, I'm not even sure this is going to be the one I want to run with. But yeah, well, I had this group. I loved this group of kids. There were only about 16 of them, and we were very close. When I became pregnant with my first child, I believe that I was doing a great job at hiding it. I mean, I didn't really feel like there was much to hide. And I remember somewhere around 8 weeks or something like that, one of the girls, her name was Ruby, she came up to me and she was like, "Miss, we think you're pregnant." And I just thought to myself, oh, these girls, well, it was the girls for sure. They are so observant. And if I looked at myself, I couldn't tell you one thing that changed. But here they are whispering about it. Clearly, they had been talking about it. They'd identified the fact that I was pregnant. And, you know, it's a very interesting thing with working with young people and being an educator, is that you don't really see your full impact on them until only in certain moments. And the reason that this particular one was memorable, along with times where it's your birthday or you leave, is that the kids come out and show you how much you mean to them. And, it was very like Mrs. Pregnant, then, the gifts start and the cards and the talking about the baby. And they've really become involved in your pregnancy.
Yes.
And, you know, it's just a lovely thing. Every day you could walk around feeling like you're underappreciated and you are forgotten and the kids take you for granted. But actually, there are those moments where the cards come out, the testimonials come out, and they're telling you that you're the best teacher you ever had, or if it weren't for you, they would have never done X. And you just think, gosh, you could have shared that a little bit. You could have spread all that praise throughout the year a bit. But it's there. And that's the thing with teaching. And that's why one of my favorite quotes is, not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. It's because, we spend a lot of time in education looking at baseline data and seeing how much the children progress and did they meet that target. But really, there are so many, unquantifiable things that happen in a classroom, in a school, in the school community that, you know, are are very, very important, and they just don't get taken into account. So I think that moment, well, those kind of moments were memorable for exactly those reasons.
I love that. Is there anything else that you would like to share before we say goodbye today?
um, I don't think so. I don't believe that I do, but if I do, I'll be coming back to you.
I wish I knew.
Today's episode was produced and edited by me. The theme music is by Otis McDonald featuring Joni Inez.
But I'm so
If you know someone who might enjoy these conversations, please share the podcast episodes as much and as often as you can. It's as simple as copying the link you use to access today's episode and sending it in a message or sharing it on social media. I'm a small, independent operation, and your shares broaden our audience. Perhaps you or someone you know will be inspired to talk about teacher burnout. If you would like to get your voice on my podcast, contact me via the link on my webpage, taught.buzzsprout.com. Coach, speaker, and author Rashid Ogunlaro said, "It may take many voices for people to hear the same message." Join me in being one of the many voices rising up to get the message out around educator burnout. This is Melissa LaFleur. Thank you for listening to Taught, the podcast.
I wish I knew